I don't know. Are you serious?
All right, welcome in, guys. Today we have the topic of our workshop as Introduction to Serverless Web Applications. Uh, Not really sure how many of us have already used serverless web applications, but just a quick intro of serverless web applications is we basically have these servers. These servers exist somewhere, but we don't control them. That's why they're known as serverless web applications. It's kind of like a gimmicky name. I understand it, but it's not like we don't have servers. So just wanted to give you like a quick intro of that. But mainly what we'll be talking about today is we'll be talking about the basics of service architecture, like how these serverless operations operate. You might have heard names of AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, or Oracle, and what these services require, such as AWS Lambda, which is one of the very popular Amazon functions. I'll just not use mic. I think I'm already loud enough. So what we're doing today is basically we're making this one app, which is like a recipe generator. You put in some details and you'll be having all these wonderful recipes made up. Like, let's say you put in like, what do you need for pizza? You put in like pizza, it will tell you, like Roma tomatoes or like all the other stuff that we basically need. So that's just like a quick intro of what we'll be doing today. Anyways, let's get started. So we're doing today, as the title suggests, we're cooking up some code, building an AI-powered recipe generator using AWS and Claude 3. Not sure if all of us over here know Claude 3, but it's a service by Anthropic. It's also a large language model, just like we have been using ChatGPT by OpenAI. So that's basically about Claude. All right. By the end of the session, I can promise that you guys will have some knowledge about these serverless web applications. At least we'll be using the AWS Lambda functions, and you'll know the exact use of how these functions work. If we get sufficient time, I promise you that we'll also walk you through, how these applications work and make some test cases if time permits. Because like this workshop alone, this is kind of like a topic which takes about, I would say, like 2 workshops. That's why in this workshop, we're only focusing on the back end of the workshop. So we won't be making like a UI or a front end because that's time consuming. Rather, we'll be going how these services actually work and a project worthy of, that you can put on your resume that you did something like this. Other than that, we'll be providing the starter code. So there's no need if you don't have like an AWS account already. If you don't, you can follow through us. But if we'll also help you, like create the AWS account. Anyways, so what's serverless? Before I begin, does anyone know what's serverless? Does anyone want to go? Yeah.
Is that because the servers like on the cloud?
Yeah.
We don't have the actual server, but we use some service like AWS to host the server.
Yeah. So exactly as he said, we have these servers. They're existing somewhere in space, but we're not using these servers, at our own place. We're not managing them physically, if that what means. So basically, in traditional application hosting, or if we used to make these traditional web applications, we had to set up and configure these servers and then, keep it running 24/7. And they're also very energy consuming and, time consuming. Also, you have to have all these resources. You have to constantly write the updates, share for your security, and you're constantly worried if the server gets hacked or something. Instead, what we do in these serverless web applications is we have these services by Amazon, these big companies, which are already providing us the infrastructure, which can be basically known as, if we've heard the name IaaS, which is like infrastructure as a service. So these companies provide us like infrastructure and we pool their resources together, and it's very, affordable, you can say, and it's also very time efficient in one way. All right. Going on to why we use these serverless web applications. You can see on the screen, it says that, okay, you have to write code once and then you can deploy instantly. It's more like Java. Like we have read about JVM, Java Virtual Machine. We've come across this name, multiple of times in the past. Like, what is a Java Virtual Machine? Basically, we use these softwares as a package, and then we don't have to write the code for all the software. It works like a magic. It's very instant. It's very efficient. That's what we're focusing here. So the best thing about serverless web applications, let me give you an example. Maybe all of us here are interested in, at some point launching our own web applications on iOS or like App Store, right? And we want to make these applications, but necessarily we don't have this infrastructure. And maybe in the beginning, we only have, let's say, 10 users or probably 50 users in this room. What if we get like 1 million users? What if we become like, popular overnight? What we're going to do? I mean, we don't have the resources, we don't have the money, we don't have the, we don't even probably have the knowledge of how to scale up that much, right? So these services by, Amazon, Google, Oracle, Azure, these are the 4 main competitors. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but AWS is the most famous. Even Netflix, which is, it's basically an AWS wrapper. It's hosted on AWS. So that's a quick intro of why we want to use these serverless things. Next thing is, there's no maintenance required, no patching, no updating, no maintenance for the servers required. And also, it's very faster to develop. Just a quick thing, guys. I'll be going through the theory first because, it's like that workshop where we don't have any prerequisite requirements. So I'll be going through the theory first, and then we'll be teaching how to make these functions and how these functions actually work. All right. Next thing is, what is a web app? Most of us here might have done mobile application development, but what is a web app? Would anyone want to go?
The application run on the website?
Yeah, exactly. As the name suggests, web app. It's like an application which you can run on a browser. You don't really need to install it. You can just write it using HTML or CSS or JavaScript. You can use it's very simple. You don't need to install it on your PC. Like, you don't have to build a separate application for your iPad or for your Mac, which are basically these mobile applications, but instead it's just like a web app, as the name suggests. And it's accessible from basically any device, The best thing about the web app is you just have to write the UI once, the front end, the buttons and the layout. Otherwise, you always have to configure it according to the device. The other thing is you have to use the back end. It handles the logic, the databases, the API calls that we do. All these things, you only have to write them once. That's the best part about the web app. And pretty much some of their examples are, the Google Doc, Instagram, Netflix, basically everything we use, every single day. That's some of the examples of web apps. Now, going to the quick intro of what are, traditional web applications like there. So the title of the workshop is right, as it suggests, like serverless web applications, introduction to serverless. So, there should be something which existed previously, right? Like, why are we moving to these serverless web applications and why we want to use these serverless web applications? As the name suggests, traditional web apps, what they basically do is you have these web pages and you have these databases. Now, all these requests, you get these post requests or the API calls or whatever you're using that database for. You have all these requests being made through the database and the web pages are calling them. Now, one of the kind of like, irritating part if you have been a web application developer about like traditional web apps is very time consuming. You have to provide the infrastructure such as like EC2. It's like provided by AWS. It's like an instance service. And then you have to install and maintain all these operating systems, and like these servers, you have to manually maintain them. And developer, for example, here we are the developers, we have to manage these operating system updates, we have to manage the scaling, we have to manage the security, we have to run it 24/7, right? And some of the things about web apps is, God forbid, we have this really big, really big application. Let's say Sun Devil Sync. Let me give you a very simple example of Sun Devil Sync. We don't have a mobile app of Sun Devil Sync, right? We only have this website that we visit, and we can RSVP to these wonderful events. See the location, see everything. God forbid it crashes. What if it crashes? I mean, if it's only being hosted on one server, or if it's being hosted locally somewhere in a room at the SU. If it crashes, data's gonna get lost. We won't be able to do these RSVPs and stuff. The best thing about serverless is that we have like multiple backups of the system. So when you have like multiple backups, even if it crashes, you're prepared for like what's gonna come next. That's the best part about serverless web applications. Let me quickly go over traditional development architecture. So over here, there's some black thing over there for traditional, but it says traditional. Now, let me go to the architecture real quick. So we see all these requests and responses over here, right? This is the framework. I mean, all of us can see what the heck is going on. It's very crowded, it's not very neat, right? I mean, in short, we can understand that whatever we see over here doesn't really seem that professional, and it's like a lot to manage just by one person or even by an organization. I mean, let's say all of us over here decide to work an app, like make an app and then publish it. If we have published it, one of us will be managing these third-party services, let's say, which we're using for storage. I mean, we're not gonna have these multiple TBs of SSDs stored at home, or these server rooms. We're not gonna make those, right? So we have these third-party services. One of them will be responsible for that. One of us is gonna be responsible for the application framework. We have to have these dedicated servers. We have to have these virtual machines, which we already know. But I mean, it doesn't really look beautiful. Let me come on the serverless thing, which is like magic, to be honest. Like the first time I studied serverless, I was like, whoa, why haven't we been like using it in the past? It's something like, you need an instant response, and you're like Googling for the answers, but you have ChatGPT. You can just ask ChatGPT to, you're on a trip, make an itinerary for like 20 days, and then you're like, okay, tell me the best places to eat nearby. Rather than going on Google Maps, you have to go through all these reviews and then select them, sort them. It's a tough task, right? I mean, time consuming, not really tough, but more time consuming. The best part about serverless is it's kind of like that. Now, the serverless development architecture, we have this client over here, right? Here's the client, and we have the web and the mobile app, right? The best part about the serverless apps is that these web apps can also be deployed as mobile apps. We're only going to talk about web apps, but I mean, the same process goes for the mobile apps as well. Then we have these API gateways. Let's say we are using these tokens or like APIs like Google Maps service, or let's say we're using ChatGPT to make our custom music creator app, or how we're going to do for this workshop. We're using this Claude 3, which is by Anthropic, and we'll be having all these tokens, and we'll be making like an AI recipe generator app. Now, what happens basically over here is there's the client for web and the mobile, and then there's like a gateway. The request goes through the gateway, and then it processes the event. What is Lambda? It's a function provided by AWS, and then we have like our serverless database over here, which is basically DynamoDB, Dynamo database. The API call goes through the database, it goes back to the function, and it returns back to the event, and it returns back to the client. Let's say we made this very simple request through Google Maps. Okay, Italian restaurants near me, right? We are the client. We are making this request. The request is being passed through the HTTP, the API gateway, and then there's a process which is being implemented, there's a function behind in the service, like somewhere in the backend, which is processing, okay, this is the database. The database is pulling this list of all these restaurants nearby, and it's returning to us to the function, and the function is returning it as an event, and then we get all these wonderful results. You can even see Uber is also a very clean example of that. When we book rides, all of that it's just like very simple architecture. Even Uber follows that. AWS uses like all these services like Netflix or just name it, Prime Video. All these services, they basically use the serverless development architecture. It's quite if we haven't like studied about it before, we might think that, oh, it's kind of like there's a bunch of stuff going on over here. But trust me, like if you see compared to traditional, you're like, okay, this is much clean, and you don't have to manage on your own. It handles all these synchronous requests on its own. You don't have to pay attention to every single detail. Basically, you're just writing the function. We're not maintaining the infrastructure. Now, I mean, a very simple example would be, let's say, I have to do computer science, and I'm a freshman. What will be like the easiest part? I'm gonna just go there and buy a laptop, or I'm gonna build my own laptop, right? I mean, let's say I'm given like $1,000. I have to buy like a very nice computer. Probably gonna go there, get the student discount on the MacBook Air, get that, start coding, right? Very few of us will be like, oh no, let's find this really nice GPU, build our own PC. I mean, majority of us will choose the easy way out, right? That's what serverless applications basically do for us. All right, now coming to the next slide. Now, what are like some of the real world use cases of the slide? So you can create chatbots. I think at one of our GDSC workshops before, which was hosted by Pavel, it was last year, Introduction to Gemini and Firebase. It was a really nice workshop. We made this chatbot over there where you can like chat to Gemini. It will reply back to you. Some of the other real world use cases are order tracking. I mean, we see this order tracking. We order something on Amazon. We check the track updates or like track order. How it's showing us, it's basically, using the Dynamo database, and then it's using the Lambda service or the email automation. I mean, if some of us over have on-campus jobs at ASU uses the Outlook service by Microsoft. And if our supervisors are out of office, we email them something and we get the response, oh, I'm not in office this week, get back to me later or something. Example of email automation, right? Image and video processing, analytics dashboard. I actually attached like an example of analytics dashboard over here. So I've never personally been a creator, but if some of us here have used any YouTube content creation before, we see all these beautiful analytics. You can see where our main clients are from, which country, which cities specifically. That's why they use these location-based services. And then we have these form submissions. I mean, Google Form is a very easy example of it. I wouldn't say Google Form uses the exact same thing, but here's like a quick example of what basically we are doing. Now, just like a very simple example of form submission, how they basically do is you can go through these API gateways, and then you go through these Lambda functions, and then you store your responses in the database. Now, all of us over here know what a database is. It basically stores all this data together. It stores all these requests and like the data, and then it gets these requests. The requests are being processed by the Lambda function, which is basically a very short code. We are actually going to write a Lambda function in this workshop. We're going to do that. All right, coming over AWS Lambda. So what's Lambda? Lambda is basically fast. You can call it like FAAS or fast, however we might call it, but it's basically a function as a service. Now, what's function as a service? If we don't know what function as a service is, it's basically we deploy these functions and not entire applications. So we're not writing these applications over there. We're just writing these small functions. Let's say we again, coming back to the example of Google Maps, I really love the example of Google Maps. It's very practical. Now we have to have, let's say, see ratings of a nearby restaurant, right? Now, one thing we can do is, write this whole application like Google Maps, which is most of us will have to, spend a lot of time. And still after that, we won't be able to, nail it because, Google has spent, great amounts of time in that. They've also spent great amounts of, service or Google Cloud. I mean, let's say we see these things, even Google Drive, what we use for, basic everyday applications. But function as a service, what it basically provides is you have this application wrapper, and you're just writing a function. That's the best part. So we don't have to, write the full complicated application, rather just the function. And your code is basically triggered by an API call. It basically uploads this file, and then updates the database. And basically, we don't have to create any servers or like manage them later on. That's what AWS Lambda helps us in. It works short for, like stateless tasks like processing form submissions or like sending these automated emails, even generating dynamic content, which we already talked about before. But one of the really good part about Lambda is it supports Node.js, supports Python, most of us over here know Python, supports C++, you name the language and it supports it. That's the best part. You can write basically any single language and it supports all of them. So, we don't have to be like writing the infrastructure like, okay, I'll have to write all these libraries for Python or I'll have to import them. No need for that. It's all gone. You just have to select the language. It's very simple. I'll be going through the demonstration once I start sharing my screen, once we're done with this. And then you'll see like how simple it is to create a Lambda function. The other part is it automatically scales with demand. So the best part is AWS Lambda. You have to write this auto scaling feature. Usually big companies or like people at startups they have to write it from the start because they are expecting their database or their clientele to grow up. And that's one of the really good things about AWS Lambda. One of the other things which I wanted to mention is it's also very cost effective. So the pricing is actually built per millisecond. That's the best part. Let's say we are again like giving an example of the Mint scooters or like these e-scooters that we can rent, the Uber ones or these e-scooters. I think most of them require like a $2 or like $5 start fee based on if we have coupons or if we get these really nice deals. Once they ask you for this initial startup fee, once you've started the service, you're billed per minute, right? That's the exact same thing that Lambda helps us with. You're basically billed per millisecond. You are not billed like per minute or like per hour of request. So that's one of the things which makes this very convenient and cost efficient. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is Bedrock. So just like AWS Lambda, Bedrock is also a service, but it's more like a foundation model. So why are we going to use Bedrock? That's one of the questions most of us might have. Bedrock is basically, it's a platform that can provide us access to these generative AI models like Claude or ChatGPT or whatever model you name it. But we have like access mainly for Claude and like Llama 2, which we have access for free. So in this workshop, we're going to use like the free tier because AWS is kind of like a paid service, but as students, we get the free tier. So we're going to use that. And the best thing about the Bedrock is you call these generative AI services using these APIs, and they just work like magic. I mean, you don't have to, write your own code. Or let's say we might have heard about DeepSeek R1, right? Most of us might have heard about when it became a very hot topic. It performed better than ChatGPT. The R1 was better than O1 initially, right? If you had to run DeepSeek when you were like processing all these requests or you were sending all these queries on DeepSeek, they were getting tons of queries. So they were probably showing, like something like timed out or not enough requests available. You were probably getting something like this. Now, what happens is they have their server, like DeepSeek, they have, only sufficient infrastructure compared to a company like OpenAI or Google or Amazon, or even Meta. So they're a very small, kind of like a medium-sized company if we compare it to like companies in US. That's why they have these, like they have limited capabilities in their server. Now, if you have to run all these, if you have to run their model, you have to download the code because it's open source. You can download their code and host on your own servers. You can have these beautiful NVIDIA GPUs, make your own server back at home or make your own supercomputer, and you can run it. But that's very expensive. I mean, most of us are students. We're not going to do that and make our own supercomputer. It's not that cost efficient. It's also very tedious to do that thing. Now, other thing about Amazon Bedrock, it's basically, as I said, fully serverless. As the name suggests, we are talking about these serverless models. And it's also great for text generation chatbots and summaries if you want to write like this summary. What we'll be using today is known as Claude 3. As I mentioned earlier, it's a service by Anthropic. It's also a AI startup, just like OpenAI. All right, let's get started. And what are we cooking? The title is pretty cool. So it's basically a backend service, backend only AI recipe generator. And we're going to use the AWS Lambda for serverless compute, which calls the Claude 3. And it's going to get triggered via API gateways. It's basically fully event-driven, scales automatically as I talked about it. We're not going to write the front end because that's kind of like time-consuming. We'll have to write the whole UI, where we're going to have to write the whole front-end services. We're not going to do that right now because, as I said, this workshop alone, like this one, is probably somewhere around like, about 180 minutes if we're gonna, because I was like timing it down. Going to take a long time. So I'm going to provide you all with the starter code and stuff. I'm going to show you all how to set up an AWS account, how you can manage your roles, how you can write a Lambda function, how you can even test it. You can test the recipes, but we're not going to write the test functions over here right now. I've provided everything. I'll show you a document real quick. I've provided everything over there. So you'll be able to test it on your own, but not today. Like not right now. Feel free to try it once you're back at home because it's kind of like time consuming. But just for some of us, if we're interested, I've provided the content. I wanted to mention that. All right. If you guys can go and scan this or visit asudsc.com/serverless, you should be able to see the instructions. We're gonna go through it now. Once you guys are done, let me know. I'll start sharing my AWS screen. Before that, does anyone have any questions? Anyone has any questions regarding like what is serverless computing or what we're discussing about? Feel free to let me know. Right. We're on the same page. All right, so we're going to get started with the main part of the workshop. Yeah.
Is serverless different from like the apps on your phone? Like if Netflix versus on the browser versus like Netflix the app?
No, it's the same.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is serverless web apps. There are also serverless mobile apps. I mean the mobile app that we use on our phone is basically just the mobile app version, but it's still serverless. Yeah. That's actually an interesting question. If I clear it in more detail, let's say we have this infrastructure built at home, in which we are operating in like a very traditional way. On the other hand, we have this serverless where we are renting these services. A very, very simple example of that would be we use ChatGPT on a daily basis, right? Now, if we were to write our own LLM model, right? Example, our own language, a large language model, we will have to write all this code. We will have to, go through the time complexity, a lot of things. We will have to make it much more efficient so that, because these LLMs are actually trained NLPs, right? You make it much more advanced than a natural language processing model. That's what differentiates between an LLM and an NLP, right? It's basically a much more advanced version. So you have to train all these models using CNNs, which are like convolutional neural networks. And when you train all these things, sometimes we don't have these resources to train them, right? The best part to do is go to ChatGPT, is free. If you want to try the 4.5, we probably pay $20 a month and you can use the ChatGPT 4.5, right? So what we're basically doing over here is serverless is we are renting these services which exist somewhere over there in these companies, and we're just using them, and we're not having any infrastructure over here. Let's say you have your own USB or your SSD on you, and you buy this SanDisk SSD, which is pretty nice, but what if it gets destroyed? I mean, we lose the data, right? The best option, it's a more affordable option, getting the SanDisk 2 TB, because you're paying upfront cost. You're probably paying like $100 and you're getting this 2 TB of storage. Rather, if you go on like Google Drive and then get this data where you're paying $10 a month, which is like $120 a year, but you're gonna have to pay that forever, probably that same amount. But you're renting the service. That's the difference between serverless and like traditional computing. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just about to say something when you said it, so.
Oh, I see. All right, so we're gonna go through the AWS thing. What's the time? It's 6:40. At around 6:45, we'll also take like a quick pizza break. So once we're done with the AWS setup, let's get done with the pizza and then we'll proceed on. All right, so we're gonna have to start AWS. Were you guys able to open this node? Let me show you how it actually looks so that. So I'm gonna walk you all through all of these details. Quick thing what you can do is go over here on project setup, and then you have to click on AWS. I already have an AWS account, so I'll just go ahead and log in. But I'm assuming most of us over here, if we haven't already used AWS, we'll have to create an account. If you guys want to go ahead and create an account, totally fine. If you guys want to, we're also live streaming it, so it's going to be recorded and uploaded on YouTube, because AWS is quite complex, just the console itself. So if you don't get anything, don't worry about it. We're going to have it all recorded, uploaded it on YouTube, and you can, watch it later and follow step by step. Also, the Notion document that we have provided, this one. Yeah, so this one over here, I've basically mentioned every single detail. Like even if you were like doing it for the first time, it shouldn't be a problem. I've listed every single detail, keeping everything in mind. All right, so just showing you a quick demo of how we make these services and how we make these requests, right? So we're in the AWS console. This is how it looks like. Once we are in the AWS console, first thing first, which we have to make sure we're actually doing correct, is we set up the region. The reason we set up the region is when we write the functions, let's say the AWS Lambda, even when we're setting up the DynamoDB, we have to mention the the service over there, like the region. So we are using US East 1. This service is located in North Virginia, and some of the other popular ones are, one is located in Portland, there's Oregon over there. Usually we just use the US East 1. You can set it to any region you want. These are basically just provided over there. If some region is busy, you can change the region, but also make sure that once you're changing the region, your function should also show the same name of the region. let's say I have US East 1 over here, and when I'm gonna write the Lambda function, if I have US West 2 over there, it's not gonna work. It won't run. All right, so since we have already selected it, I've selected it by default. I realized this one thing. I created a new AWS account a couple of weeks ago, and I checked this that by default here in the US, for some reason, they provide the European server. I'm not sure why they do that, but once you have set up the AWS account, make sure that you select the North Virginia region. All right, we already see here like IAM over here, like in the section, but I'm just gonna do it like it's a new AWS account. So we're gonna type IAM. What IAM does, it basically manages the root users. Let's say we're the user, we're gonna be one of the root users. So we're gonna manage, like these permissions, these authorization tokens, and all this stuff. What we're gonna do is, I'll show you over here. So most of us who don't have an AWS account probably don't have this all set up, but I'll just show you like in a quick go. You'll have to, click on create a user, create user. You'll have to type all the details. Once you click next, you have to select the permissions. Click in permissions, you'll have to select the root user because you'll be creating the account for the first time. The reason why they give multiple user things is, let's say we're working on this project with different team members, and we don't want to provide them the administrator access. Rather, we want to only provide them with certain details or like certain set of instructions. And we can use these different permissions and like provide them with like a different user base. All right, since we already have the user created, so I'm not gonna create because it shows over here that it's created. Rather, show you how to create a role. All right, you can see over here that it shows the role, right? We're gonna go in the top right corner, shows create role over here. These, by the way, these are some of the previous roles that I created. Or some for side projects and stuff. But as I was mentioning the EC2 instance, this is like over here, and then SimpleDB is basically a database instance that is provided over here. Right, I'm gonna click on click on use case Lambda, because we are creating a Lambda service. So we'll be writing like a Lambda function. That function will basically be responsible for the recipe generator app. Like the code that we're gonna write in Python for that function will mainly be responsible for writing that, like getting us all the recipes and stuff. All right, so make sure you click over here like AWS service, and then because it mentions over here, I've zoomed in so you guys should be able to see. Allow AWS services like EC2, Lambda, or others to perform actions in this account, right? This is specifically for Lambda. We're gonna go over here and select Lambda, right? Click, Lambda, yeah, use case Lambda. I selected Lambda over here. Next. Now, this part is actually very important. The attached policies, which is basically permission policies, we have to make sure that we're giving them all the required policies that are required for our function to run. In this case, what we will be doing is we will be giving it the Amazon Bedrock access because we want to use the Claude 3 or Llama 2, whatever you want to use. We're going to use Claude 3 because it has a free tier. But let me show you over here. So we go over here and we're going to type Amazon Bedrock. So there's 3 of them. We're going to give them full access because it has both the read and the write permissions. Over here, it just shows Amazon Bedrock read only. And click Amazon Bedrock full access. And then we have to choose one more, which is basically AWS Lambda basic execution role. This one. So this service will allow our Lambda function to, have all the execution policies on our behalf. It will be processing all these API calls and these requests. We are gonna click on next. Role name. You can give any name, but I will be giving Lambda Bedrock execution role. The reason I'm giving this name, it will help me remember later that, okay, just creating this role for Lambda to process requests in my place. As we said that it's, it's kind of like it handles these requests automatically. That's one of the things it's gonna do. So we have the trusted. We don't have to edit anything over here, especially for this one, but usually what we do is, we can, there are certain set of policies which are not really available. We can edit their JSON, or, you can even edit their whole libraries over there and click on save, but we're not gonna do any changes in that because that's fine. And then once we have the name, you guys can see over here, Amazon, just a quick description, allows Lambda functions to call AWS services on your behalf. As it says over here, that's what we're doing. Click on create role, right? So now a role has been already created. You can probably see it over here, Lambda Bedrock execution role. All right. Now what we'll have to do is we'll have to attach the policies, and it's a step further. But before that, we're gonna take like a quick 10-minute break. We're gonna have the pizza break. You guys can grab pizzas. In case if you guys have any questions, feel free to come to me and ask me. Yeah.
Do we need to create a user?
Yeah, you have to create a user. What's your name and then type dash development.
And then
Type full name. Okay. This is the role which will always exist. That's why I would say name it. Add user next. For the first time we will do this. So it's a train. That's all, yeah.
where is yours? Going to be?
It's right on our internet channel. There's a place you. I can.
I like a lot.
Later. Actually, I think send the link of the live stream. Let me send that over here. लाइव स्ट्रीम हो तो रहा है बट मैं लाइव स्ट्रीम डिस्कॉर्ड पे डालना भूल गया वो नया बिल्डिंग बस यूजुअली हरी डाल दो मैंने कहा है नहीं वो Germany. Iran. Oh my.
Hello. Bên đây. Khoa. Dạ. Không, tôi hai cặp.
हम लोग दो देख रहे
Là anh là 54 giờ.
हैं पहले दिखा रहा था ना टू वॉचिंग ओह
Dạ. Cái code challenge nữa.
कोई एक व्यक्ति देख रहा है इसको इंटरेस्ट हो गया इसका सेट
Không, Huy được vào ICVT. Mà
वो इसका पीयूष
bị gắn lên cái em là gì đó. Để làm.
नहीं में मिलती है भाई तो अच्छा टाइम लगता है वो सब मैंने नोशन पे मेंशन किया इसलिए एक्चुअली भाई केवल अकाउंट बनाने में ही
very complicated
it's
to
very
navigate.
complicated
मैंने request
explain
किया
me how to use the account but I was thinking which needs to get I एक घंटे में 45 मिनट में थ्योरी समझाना है इसमें
It's not very तो रिसीट चाहिए क्या रिसीट चाहिए
नहीं रिसीट नहीं चाहिए है मेरे
शायद ना ही आपको
भेजिए और कीजिए
प्लीज
Vegetarian, हाँ अलग ही वाला बैकग्राउंड हम लोग कर रहे हैं आ रहा हूँ
Thế có cái lòng này không?
We've got seconds if you. Zero. Which card is that? No, look, I can. He's like.
Once you guys are done, just let me know. I'll start over, with creating the function and the permission stuff. And then we'll probably be done with this workshop. Again, I'll just walk you guys through the code, what we're basically doing in the AWS Lambda function and everything. But we will not be writing the test cases to test the application just yet, because again, it's a bit time consuming. But those all of us who have already set our, AWS account, if you guys want to set up later at home, feel free to message me on Discord. Those all of us who have already set it up over here, just let me know after the workshop and I'll show you how we can test it. We can discuss more on it.
Ăn không? Em chụp ảnh em chạy đóng rồi em ngồi em đang còn ở đây
What size? That's what they shot. That's.
We only have the main thing left now, which is basically writing the Lambda functions. Let me get that guys, and we should be done with the workshop. So let me go to the Notion page. All right, we were pretty much done with this. The AWS account setup. We enabled the Amazon Bedrock, which is essential for, again, I mentioned, which is essential for, these API calls and the services that we were using. That's what we were using Bedrock for. Step 3 over here, we skipped that step because we necessarily don't need it, because it's basically for loading the AWS client service on your PC terminal. We can do this install AWS CLI, and then you can basically send in a request, and then you can access the AWS console using your Mac. If we are very fond of that, we can also use that just to make it more user comprehensive and easy to see. I'm just going to do it through the AWS console, right? I'm not going to use the terminal. But I would suggest using AWS, like using your own Mac terminal. It's quite easy. And also once you get the hold of it, it's very easy to debug using the terminal. All right. What we have to do is, so you guys might remember, we created a new role, which was Lambda Bedrock execution role, right? Now what we have to do is, in our root user, which basically you will create, your name and development, you have to attach some policies for the Bedrock and the Lambda. Since I've already used it before, so I have these policies attached, but let me show you how it's actually done. So we go over here on add permissions, and then we click on attach policies directly. So we don't have to click on add user to group. Basically, it creates a new group and selects these new policies. We don't have to create a sub user. That's why we don't want to use that. But we have to attach policies directly. Now we click over here. It's going to show, you can see there's these number 1334 policies. Actually, but let me just search Bedrock full access. Now the reason it's not showing over here because we already have it attached. You can see over here. But let's say if I remove these policies, I'll show again how to do that. Also, one thing, I'm just showing it for demonstration purposes. But if you have an instance running or something, I would suggest not to remove these policies mid-tier, while your instance or your function is running. Otherwise, it will stop the service and it will affect your application in some way. So we're gonna go on Amazon Bedrock. Since I removed it, we're seeing that it has Amazon Bedrock full access. We're going to AWS Lambda, which will be managing our requests on our behalf. If you guys can see the AWS Lambda full access over here. All right. Over here, click on next. Add permissions. It shows that the two policies added to Abiru Vijay Gunakar development. In this case, it will show your name. The policies have been attached. This is very easy, what we were just going through. But the main part comes now. So what we have to do is write our own Lambda function. What we will be using Lambda function, as I mentioned earlier, let me go through the code once, and then I'll show you how to create the Lambda function. And we will be pretty much done with the back end of the thing. I'll also, in this Notion page, I've also, showed how you can test your API and how you can, parse Claude's response over here. But we're not going to do that today, as I mentioned earlier. All right, so you have this code over here, right? What we're doing over here is, let me walk you over. So import functions, basically we're just using to, import the JSON. We'll be parsing the Claude's responses, and then AWS SDK or for Python to interact with services on our behalf, like Bedrock. And these are basically entry points for Lambda. We'll be making API calls, but this one will be will be for Lambda. This is the most important part, as I mentioned before, where you will be have to selecting the region. So once you're like formatting the text prompt for like Claude 3, you have to select the region name, carefully. If you don't select the region name carefully, if it's like US West 2 or some other region, or in Europe or somewhere else in the world, your function won't implement the call. So it won't be called and it won't be working at all. Because the thing is the region has been set somewhere else and your function has been set somewhere else. Do you have a question? Yeah, you look like you have a question. It's you.
Just wondering what it like automates. Ultimately, like just choose the region that we put in instead of the.
No. So this is for the code that we write. Yeah, so I'll actually show you. Are you asking about the region that we chose once we created the AWS console profile? No worries. Let me actually show you real quick. Actually, I completely understand. It can be a bit, the AWS console, it can be a bit overwhelming, but trust me, like about a year and a half ago, it was much more overwhelming. Like they were just using the same UI for the past 15 years. It was like that Windows Vista, but even worse. So let me go over here, AWS. Sign into console. All right. So you see over here, I think that was your question, right? This is where we select the region first. This is the same region that we are using. So North Virginia, I mean, those are just the codes, US East 1 and all. So in our Lambda function, we will be correctly implementing, the region. So anyways, let me show you guys over here. You'll be selecting your region over here. This will be the text prompt for like Claude 3 to implement the API calls. And then we're basically creating a clientele for, to call the Amazon Bedrock. The policy that we attached, which was like Amazon Bedrock full access and AWS Lambda full access, basically for this. So Lambda will be calling these functions on our behalf, but Amazon Bedrock will be processing these requests. So if we see over here, like model ID anthropic.plot trace on it, what it's doing over there is, it calls that function. We might have already seen, the other models by Anthropic, like Claude 3.5 and all those. Those are not available for free. Since we are using the free tier, we are using the Claude 3s on it. Also, the Llama 3.1 and 3.2, I don't think they're also available for free. So there's only certain services that are available in like the free tier. But these pretty much complete our job. I mean, we ask them like these basic requests. They won't be able to, put in like some hefty research questions or something on your behalf. They won't be able to automatically implement that. But, like a recipe generator app or like a chat bot or, like your Discord bot, it can do all of that on your behalf. All right, so let me go over here and create a Lambda function. So the Lambda function is basically in services. We go in the search toolbar, click on services, or you can just click Lambda and the Lambda will show up. All right, actually pretty cool. I never really observed it that close. Lets you run code without thinking about servers. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. You don't have to, think about servers and stuff because the code that we actually have, it's kind of small. But if we want to use that on our computer, it will be pretty complex to set up all these services and connecting all these servers. Here we just have to attach these policies. Looks a bit overwhelming, just the console, but again, it's very easy to implement. All right, so we're gonna go and click on create a function, right? And we're gonna click on attach from scratch because we don't have like a container image. Quick example of what an image is. It's not like the normal image that we take on a phone. Rather, let's say we have this virtual machine or we have these containers. Virtual machine is basically, you're packaging all these software details and encapsulating them. And you can download these virtual machines as an image. Let's say if you're over here, you set up like a virtual machine on your laptop and I have to use that service, right? So what will I have to do is I can ask you to, make the image, just download it on my computer, use it. Very easy. Yeah. You can just use that. Like you don't have to go through the tedious process of like setting up a VM using VMware or VirtualBox or all these services. Pretty easily. But since we're not using a VM, so we're just gonna do attach from scratch. Again, we can create, like name the function anything. Let me see what I named it previously. Right. Recipe generator. I deleted this function. Otherwise, it will show us that the function already exists. But let me go over here. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, like the runtime thing, like you can select from a bunch of different languages. Shows you, like Node.js, Python, and all this stuff. We're gonna use Python 3.12 for this because the code that we have written, it's I wrote that for Python 3.12 version. Usually, all the latest ones can run that as well. I mean, if you use the Python 3.13, but the previous ones are not capable of running the calls sometime because some of the functions don't really exist, but the latest ones can usually do that. Just for the safer side, we're going to use Python 3.12 because sometimes in the newer versions they have removed some and like named different names for the instances. Anyways, we don't have to change the the default execution role. We're just going to create like a new role with basic Lambda permissions, right? Actually, I think I use, oh yeah. So yeah, again, quick thing over here, you can create a new role with basic Lambda permissions, but what we'll have to do is it will create a sixth role. I already had, like some roles set up over here. It will create a new role, but we can use, use an existing role. All right, so let me walk you guys over again. Over here, we set up a role, right? We created like a, like a new role. Give Lambda access to Bedrock. Before that, we set up like a new role, which I was like going through. So basically what we're doing is the Lambda Bedrock execution role, where we attach like those two different policies. Just have to add that. Architecture, it will be x86-64. We don't have to worry about that. But again, architecture is basically just what we use on our computers. It's just asking for the server. ARM64, we know our latest Macs are running on that. We're going to use the x86-64. All right, now we're going to hit on create function. Bless you. All right, so it shows, successfully created the function AI recipe generator. You can now change its code and add configuration. Invoke your function with the test event, choose test. That's the only part we're not going to do here today because you have to write these test cases and then, test the whole thing. I've provided the exact same how you can do that over here, like testing the API, and you can use Postman for that. So you can use either curl or Postman. I use Postman for this service. Also, like a quick thing for you guys. I think I mentioned it in Notion already, but once you create an AWS account, you have to also get the permission for Claude 3. So if you don't already have the permission for, like these Amazon Bedrock LLMs like Llama 2 or Claude 3, you're given that permission for free, but you have to request access for it. Sometimes it takes like 4 to 6 hours to process those requests. So most of us over here probably don't have that request. So you guys will have to, request the access through it. I have attached the link of that in the Notion. So once you go back at home, you can try that. But let me go through that right now. All right, so if we see that, there a basic Lambda function has already been created, shows lambda_function.py, right? So it just shows, like hello from Lambda, just like hello world. It's not doing anything else. But what we're gonna do is we just have to replace the code from what we have in the Notion. We're gonna implement it over here. That will be basically that will be, the core of how our services are gonna get implemented. I've already provided a starter code for all of us. But what you have to do is, once you have like pasted the code, you can click over here and click on deploy. And it shows that successfully updated the function AI recipe generator. Now what it basically does is it has these two separate functions. Sometimes it directly won't show you deploy. You have to hit on save and then you have to hit on deploy. But this is most of it. This is the main part of the workshop where you're creating a Lambda function. What we are basically doing over here is, I'll give you a very brief of how it would appear to be if we were going to write the test cases or the instances for it. It shows over here, right? Like the prompt, create a recipe using these ingredients. You're gonna provide these ingredients. Let's say you can mention Roma tomatoes, spaghetti and all this stuff. It's gonna mention you, okay, this is what we can make. Or like you can mention these ingredients, like 3-4 ingredients. It's gonna come up with a list of recipes that you can make. You can also, reverse it. You can type, I have these, create, instead of the ingredients, you can just you can do whatever. You can just write, okay, what are the ingredients of a biryani or like a pizza or, let's say spaghetti. You can like work up to your prompt, like you can write the prompt. What it does over here is, basically calling the function, like the model ID, which is for the, the Claude 3 that we are using. And over here, it parses the JSON, right? And the max number of tokens, we have set it to 500. We will also have to be very careful about that because we are using the free tier. There's only certain number of tokens that are free. Over that, they charge you money. So we just also have to be careful about that. All right, guys, that's pretty much all for the workshop. If you were to make this app, after that, what you will have to do is probably click on test. In the Notion last page, I've provided the test function. If you guys want to test at home, you can do that. And you can write like a front end, which maybe we'll cover some other time. Right, thanks a lot, guys.
Anh nói chung cái này là sao? Cái là nó đang làm serverless, tao không thấy